Josh Reese here, Ben DuBose there. This is the Red and Orange Report YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit special. We're going to do an episode about what have opponents said about the Rockets.
Yeah, specifically not just opponents, but coaches, scouts, everybody involved with the other teams. We've been kind of collecting comments the last few weeks.
Gathering intel.
Yes, just doing a lot of listening, a lot of asking, and, we found out some interesting things. We're taping this right before the Rockets-Kings game, and George Karl had some interesting things to say tonight. We'll get to those first, but I think the most interesting place to start out with was a scout, I'll say scout for an Eastern Conference team on James Harden a few weeks ago. And why don't you kind of fill everybody in on what his comments were?
Well, the scout, when I asked him, I tried to get him to compare James Harden to a player. This scout played in the generation of the greatest of greats basketball player-wise. And he really didn't have a comparison to James Harden. He compared him to Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
And I was kind of curious about that. But when you think about it, they're a little bit similar, Russell Westbrook and James Harden.
Yeah.
A similar type of player. James Harden a little bit bigger, whatever. But he also had an interesting nugget, which I thought was really key. He said that James Harden had better handles than Michael Jordan. And this guy went against Michael Jordan. So, I mean,
so he would know.
Seen him.
And I think that's one thing that, we need to hit home. Not that handles are the be-all, end-all, but Harden, yes, he absolutely has them. Over the past 24 hours, we've heard so much talk about the Stephen Curry move where he dropped Chris Paul, and, it was kind of funny to see Chris Paul just fall down. I don't think anybody outside of Clippers fans particularly likes Chris Paul. But, Curry does have handles, but Harden's got handles too. We all remember what he did to Ricky Rubio.
Yes.
He actually, at one point, the last Oklahoma City game, Harden did the same thing to Westbrook. It just didn't get remembered because Harden unfortunately missed the shot. But he had Westbrook on skates just all over the floor. And so, his handles, not that they were ever weak, but they have gotten so good this year that when he gets isolated one-on-one on someone, he can make folks look silly, the same way that Curry did to Chris Paul. And, it's easy to take that for granted because, we're in an era where just the handles for these guards are getting better and better. Yeah. But I thought the comparison to MJ was a pretty interesting one because, if you look back, it shows what a golden era it is in NBA basketball.
Yeah.
Because, you can actually make the argument that Harden's handles are better than, the greatest player to ever play the game.
Yeah, the bigger guards are getting better handles. Like you said, the scout was also really big on the addition of this season of Trevor Ariza. I mean, he couldn't talk highly enough about how big of an addition that was. And to true, I mean, that addition has been very key for the Rockets this year.
Yeah, how many guys, we talked about this in the last video episode we had, how many guys can guard Chris Paul, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis all in a month? The most interesting thing, though, it's not just what he does for the Rockets. Take a look at the team that he left. We just saw on Wednesday the Rockets went up against the Washington Wizards, which are his old team, and they were struggling to have a defensive identity. The Rockets won that game with ease, even though they couldn't do anything in the first quarter of that game. Couldn't buy a shot, and it's the Wizards won off-season headlines when they replaced Ariza with Paul Pierce. But when you're talking about a guy like Paul Pierce, it's a name rather than a true two-way player, a true guy that's going to help your team on both ends. And I think a lot of the Wizards' struggles have been their inconsistency, especially on the defensive side of the floor. And as we talked about before, defense is what prevents teams like the Rockets from going into prolonged slumps because you can control your effort every night. If your game is built around how much can I score, you're going to have a week or two where you just can't throw it in the ocean, you get out of sync, and before you know it, you can lose 5 or 6 games in a row. And the Rockets haven't had that this year. As we've talked about before, never lost more than 2 games.
Yep.
Whereas the Wizards have been a very inconsistent team, and I think the loss of Trevor Ariza has a lot to do with it.
You touched on it, that the Rockets, the offense may come and go, but the defensive effort, when that's there, I mean, it's there. And that was something that George Karl today mentioned.
Sure. And he noted so many changes with this team. He called them a great untold story, saying that the Rockets, to have this record, if they beat the Kings tonight, they'll be second in the West, despite all these injuries, despite having played 2 games the entire year, and now with Beverly out for the year, that's all they'll ever have. With their projected starting lineup, the Rockets are 48 minutes from being the number 2 seed in the West, and may already be that by the time some of you watch. But, he called him a great untold story, and then he's had some really interesting things to say about Harden. He did praise the defensive improvements, but I thought it was also interesting And that when he talked about Harden as an MVP candidate, he also said that his offensive game had developed a lot. And he referred to Harden as being more of a ball mover. He said the ball movement was a lot better this year. And I thought that was really interesting because in the past, George Karl teams, think back to his last year at Denver, which was 2 years ago, that team owned the Rockets. That was the first year that Harden was here, and they went into the playoffs. They eventually were the 8th seed as it shook out and played the first seeded Thunder. But there's a possibility they could get as high as a 3, and everybody wanted to avoid Denver at all costs because they were 4-0 against them, and no game was even close. And I think they had the recipe for defending Harden and for defending the Rockets back then. And of course, yeah, it's a different team now, with Dwight, and there's more interior play than that team with Harden and Parsons and Jeremy Lin was all fast break, run and gun. But it says a lot that even with all the injuries this year and so much being theoretically put on James Harden's shoulders, even through all that, he hasn't just been a chucker. It hasn't been Russell Westbrook putting up 38 points on 32 shots. He's gotten it done within the team concept, and he's gotten other guys involved. Harden's had a lot to do with Demo's emergence this year, and I think that's what Karl was referring to when he was saying that Harden's not just a better defensive player, he's a better all-around player. Even through the injuries, he's moving the ball better, and he's doing things besides just scoring.
Now, one of the things I took away from that was he mentioned about James Harden being an individual back in the day, but now he's become more of a team player, and he's risen the people that are around him.
I thought that was very telling because I think that's exactly how they game planned they being Denver against the Rockets a couple of years ago. Now, again, caveat, they didn't have Dwight, et cetera, et cetera. But, they generally swarmed James. They had Iguodala back then. They would put him on him. They would also shade someone else. And James would still try and get his, and he didn't adjust at the time. Even though he was a great scorer, he probably wasn't a great player. And that's what Karl said today. He said he's gone from a very good player and all-star to a legit MVP candidate. And it's the maturation of all the other aspects of his game. We've talked about his defense all year long, but his emergence as a true team player on offense was a very interesting observation by George Karl today that I think has a lot of truth.
One of the other things recently, I talked to Flip Saunders a couple games ago when the Rockets played the Wolves, and he mentioned that we haven't talked about this yet, but he mentioned that Corey Brewer should be in the conversation for six man of the year. And truthfully, he should be in the conversation. Of course, Lou Williams has been having a great year, and any of the Golden State Warriors bench players could probably win it too. But Corey Brewer definitely deserves mention to be in the sixth man. He's
basically the other side of the coin to Trevor Ariza. When we talk about Ariza bringing the defensive effort every night, with Brewer, it's some on defense too, but it's just that energy off the bench. And that's,
he attacks the rim
a lot
like
of guys,
nobody's business.
When you have these guys like Ariza and Brewer that are so consistent with the things they can control, which is defense, flying all over the floor, it prevents you from going in those long slumps. And, the most telling stat about this team all year, we said it before and we'll say it again, they've never lost more than 2 consecutive games. And when you have those energy guys, when you have those players that can control what they can control, because there are some aspects of the game, scoring on offense, it doesn't matter how well you shoot. You're going to have some games that you just don't shoot well. That's just the nature of the beast. Kyle Korver's even been in a little bit of a slump for after the All-Star break. I think he's broken out of it recently. But, no one is, on the offensive side of the ball, going to be 100%, and that can lead you to slumps. But guys like Ariza and Brewer have a lot to do with the consistency that I think has defined the Rockets throughout this year.
One of the other things that I remember from, just gathering all this intel and everything was one of the first games that Pablo Prigioni played, Doc Rivers was really high on Pablo Prigioni and what he did off the bench. And Pablo Prigioni is going to be key for the Rockets going forward.
Without Pat Beverly, yes.
Doc Rivers praised him early on. Pablo Prigioni has only gotten better. He's also taking shots, and he's not as hesitant as he was in the beginning, and he's also getting guys in the flow. The offense a lot better.
Sure. Everybody always asks, what was wrong with Pablo. I don't think there's anything wrong with him. He just couldn't buy a shot. And, when you're the third string point guard and, your shot's a little cold, it's tough to get minutes. But, his career, he's pretty much a 40% NBA three-point shooter. It shows that when he gets time, he's going to make those shots. It's just a matter of getting the repetition for the law of averages to kick in. And now with Beverly's injury, he's going to get that time. And he can make a real difference, We had Chris Bernuka of Sheridan Hoops on the other night, and he said, you can always count on him to to run your offense. And you can have him as he said, a 24 minutes per game player on a playoff team, which is good because that may be what the Rockets need. But I thought watching the game in particular on Sunday, that stretch when he hit a big three, the lead was 10-4, he hit a big three, he got a steal, and then he had an assist on another three, I think it was Brewer, that put the lead back to 10 and basically put it away. And that's the kind of things he can do. We all love Jason Terry. They're 9-1. As we sit here now with Terry as a starter. But Terry's game is so conditional on his shot. And that's okay. He's 37 years old. He is what he is. That's at this point in his career, which is he's a long-range bomber. And a lot of games he's going to be good. But if he has a game where he's not hitting, or if it's a matchup where, he's just too slow laterally to play, you may need Prigioni to play major minutes, more minutes than Terry, and now that he's getting those minutes, he's making more shots, and I think that's only going to continue because he's been in the NBA 3 years now. Everything shows this guy can shoot the NBA three-point shot. He just had a rough start to it in Houston, and he never had the sample size to get out of it because he's a third-string point guard, and there weren't many minutes to go around. Well, now Beverly's out. Now Prigioni's getting the chance to show what he can do, and the past couple of games he's shown a lot of positive things.
One of the other things that Chris Bernucas said was if Patrick Beverly did not play in the Rockets for the rest of this year, he didn't think that the Rockets he thought it was going to be really difficult for the Rockets to make it a first round of playoffs. So it's up to Pablo Prigioni, Nick
one
Johnson.
One of those guys to step up. And, George Karl touched on that a little bit tonight with saying that he thinks the Rockets are a dangerous first-round team. Mm-hmm. He said he hopes they don't draw San Antonio, and I don't blame him. We've had guys on our podcast that have said the same thing.
I hope they don't draw San Antonio.
A guy like George Karl, he's an NBA veteran, and he's been around the league for a long time, and guys like that are going to believe in the Spurs until they have incredibly abundant reasons not to. So I can't blame him for that comment, but it sounds like unless the Rockets draw San Antonio, he didn't outright say it, but it sure sounds like he thinks they're going to win that first-round series.
So this has been the Red and Orange Report. Josh Reese here.
Ben DuBose here.
And make sure to check this out on YouTube and check us out on our WordPress site, Red and Orange Report. And we will see you guys next time.